Hi, I'm Will, and welcome to the Salesman podcast. On today's episode, we're diving into successful cold email trends for 2022, and our guest is Jason Bay. Jason is the Chief Prospecting Officer over at Blissful Prospecting. He's on a mission to help reps and sales teams turn complete strangers into paying customers. And with that, Jason, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be back, Will.
I'm excited to have you back on,
mate.
mate.
We were just talking. It's been a couple of years since we jammed last on a podcast, so I'm looking forward to being back.
A couple of years, you're perfectly suited for this topic of cold email, cold outreach. Perhaps we'll touch on other areas of cold outreach as well. We'll dive into some trends. It'll be interesting to see the difference between what worked last time we spoke and then what's perhaps working in the marketplace right now we're in February 2022 as we record this.
Yep.
So let's start by setting some benchmarks. We want to measure our cold outreach. We want to see if we're having success or not. I don't know if you've got finite numbers on this. If not, the gist of things will be more than appropriate. Jason, what is an average cold email response reply rate in 2022? And then what should we be aiming for? How do we know if we're having success?
Yeah, it's really hard to find good data on this, actually. So Clearbit's got some stuff that you can take a look at. And I've sort of noticed a downward trajectory in the data in the last 2 or 3 years. So Clearbit's data says less than a 1% reply rate to a cold email. And you think about that, and I don't know about you, that's a lot of work to get a response. You got to send 100 emails out to get a response. That's a lot of work. Right now, with Outreach, SalesLoft, any of the kind of traditional sales engagement vendors, they're all seeing a very similar pattern of that reply rate going down. Now, what is good? Depends. It depends on what you're selling, the transaction size, how many meetings that you need to get, the level of personalization. And to give you a range here, if you were selling enterprise, let's say, like some of my clients, and they're selling, let's say a customer experience or employee experience solution into a large company where the deal size might be 500,000 plus at a minimum size, I'm going to expect 10 to 20% reply rates on those emails because I'm working 20 accounts at a time and I'm taking the time to actually look for triggers in the company. I'm researching the individual. Maybe I'm listening to a podcast interview with them. I would expect the reply rates to be much higher on those and meeting volume to be much lower in that case. And then the very other end of the spectrum, you have people selling stuff that's very transactional, very SMB, type of thing. And if what you're selling has at least a 10 to 12,000 plus a US dollar, I don't know what that translates into to the rest of the world's currencies, but
don't worry, everyone talks in dollars. I'm a British company. We sell our product in dollars. That's where the world's at, I think.
Okay. If it's at least $10,000 or $12,000, annual contract value, it's worth doing a little bit of customization on the emails. But you're not going to spend an hour researching someone to sell them something that's $1,000, a month. You don't have the time to do that. So you might have reply rates more in the 3 to 6% range, and then you have everywhere in between. So I think you need to do some sales math and think about how many deals do I need to be closing on a quarterly basis? You've talked about this a lot. How many deals do I need to be closing on a quarterly basis? And how does that backtrack into my closing rates and how many qualified opportunities I would need, how many intro calls that would be? And then you backtrack into the outbound metrics. How many outbound activities does it take to create a meeting? You got to kind of work your sales math a little bit in order to really figure out what is a good or bad reply rate for you. But I can tell you, regardless of the scenario, 1% is not good.
No,
that's a little too much work.
I love it, and I was going to bring it back to what you said, and you ended with it. Then, Jason, it's a lot of frigging work for not a lot.
Yeah.
Are you sending 100 emails at that point, or are you spamming 100 emails at that point? I guess we need to define what spam is to discourage people from doing it to a certain extent, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the difference between spamming someone and cold emailing them is, I think it's the accountability. With a lot of these automation tools, the part that's kind of tough is oftentimes you don't really hit send to that person. You might hit the send button and it goes out to 100 people, but you're so removed from what you're actually doing the way that I would compare it is, not to get political, but any, kind of politician that is making a big decision that impacts a lot of people, whether that's going to war or something that, impacts taxes or, underprivileged people, they're so far removed from most of those decisions, the way that we do it here in America, at least, where they don't really feel the accountability of their actions. In a very small form, we're doing that with our sales engagement tools, where we hit send in a sequence to a couple hundred people, and we didn't actually hit the send button to Will Barron, the chief revenue officer at this software company I'm trying to get a hold of. And we wouldn't normally hit the send button on a lot of the stuff that we're sending. So the difference between spam, I guess, and cold email, to answer your question, is, how purposeful am I in reaching out to this person? Did I pick out this person, this company? Am I reaching out to them on purpose? And am I making it evident to them that this was intentional? I'm not approaching you like a list. I'm approaching you as an individual. And there's ways that you can kind of do a hybrid of both. But that's how I look at the difference between the two.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I like to think of it of, would you send that email to your mum? Would you send that email to a friend? Would you send that email internally to someone in your organization? And if they would just click spam, then it's probably a crappy email that leave to marketing to send those emails and to warm up a client list if that's what you need, as opposed to it's a terrible use of a salesperson's time to go about it that way. Just on these numbers, and I want to get into trends and what's working, what isn't working, what's changed in a second. But is this a rubbish way, having asked the question and listened to your response, Jason, is this a rubbish way to measure success of the response rate of a single email? Should we be looking at the response rate of a campaign or a cadence that probably includes social selling, LinkedIn, whether it's cold calls included, knocking on doors as well? Should we be looking at our success and response rate from starting cold outreach to then giving up on cold outreach with a prospect versus the response rate of a single email?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question, because we do have to kind of step back and take a 10,000 foot view. So I look at, outbound, I like to think of it as a game of odds. So right now, when you look at this in terms of probability, I already mentioned that email, there's a 1 in 100 chance that you get a response to your cold email. With cold calling, it's not much better. According to Gong and what I see across sales teams, it's 1.48%. Sometimes I'll see it around 3 or 4%. But of a chance of a positive outcome from a cold call, not even getting a meeting, just a next step of some sort. So basically, the person didn't ask you to take them off your list. So I don't know about you, I don't really like those odds. Those are really low odds. And the thing that we have to think about is that the number one thing that we are driving with outbound is we want a qualified meeting. So we want a meeting that has a chance to turn into some sort of opportunity. So if you look at outbound as a very simple equation of number of qualified meetings equals volume times quality. And there's a few things that go into that quality metric, but you can manipulate that equation any way that you want. You just have to start with the number of qualified meetings that you want to get. So if we use some really simple math, you could say, hey, it's 5 qualified meetings that I need to get because I sell enterprise, let's say, and I'm an account executive that I need to get per month. A lot of times the way people try to manipulate and get to that number is they really focus on the volume piece. So they might have a 1% conversion rate into a meeting, let's say. So that volume is like 500 prospects. That's one way that you could do that. And I'm pretty sure 1% of 500 is 5. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Well,
I feel that the pressure's on me now to double check all the math in real time. I'm having me post-it note with like a load of equations on it.
Yeah, so that's one way that you could do it. But the other side, the quality side, is really what I help most companies with. And that's a combination of your message, whether or not the prospect is a good fit, so the prospect fit, and then it's also your soft skills. So if we look at this as a framework, this is where we can kind of go in and out. You mentioned cadence. I look at outbound as a 3-part framework of identify, engage, and create. So we can get to that qualified meeting mark by making sure that we identify good fit prospects. So it doesn't matter how clever or great your email is if it's not going to the right person at the right company. And then we know about the language in which these people talk about their priorities and problems, which we should spend some time on. And then that middle part, engage, that's our ability to start a conversation. So that's your emails, your phone calls, that's how you sequence all of that kind of stuff. And then the create part of that equation is how do we secure a meeting and turn this into a qualified opportunity? And typically we're going to have to objection handle in order to get the number of meetings that we need. So to your point, it's a combination of all of those things. The email is only going to be as good as the person that you're sending it to. It's only going to be as good as like your soft skills of being able to write a compelling message. And then the actual message itself. How am I talking to the person about what they're focused on, their priorities, problems that get in the way, et cetera? And so I want to look at all three of those areas, and I'm happy to get as tactical as you like to. I have example emails that we could talk about, all kinds of stuff. So we can get as tactical as you like, Will.
Cool. Well, we'll use that framework for the rest of this podcast. Now, one thing that's just cropped up in the mind of maybe 70% of the people listening to this, the 30,000 people that are going to listen to this on the driving to work, they're going, Jason, this sounds great. That sounds like a lot of work, mate. That sounds like a lot more work than what I'm doing just clicking send to spam 10,000 people that marketing have just given me. Can you just reiterate, you've already touched on this, but can you reiterate the numbers here of maybe it seems like a lot of work up front, but you're going to send way less emails to get the same or better results? Just to any naysayers who would like to spam, just to kind of knock that on the head before we get into the tactics.
Yeah, it's like, why should you even care about doing quality, like having quality as a side of your approach? For sure. It's a fair question. I think about a couple things. One, when you have to email 500 people in order to get a meeting, and you look at the conversion rates on that and all of that other stuff, you potentially alienated hundreds of people that will never do business with you just simply because you're an email spammer. I think people don't take in consideration that when someone hits unsubscribe or wants you to take them off your list, you can't ever communicate with them again. If someone asks you to take them off your list because you can't communicate with that person ever again. Mm-hmm. So if your goal is like you're selling enterprise and you need to talk to chief technology officers or CIOs or whatever, like you're putting yourself on a blacklist where your company can never contact these people ever again. I've had clients before I come in and work with them where their entire domain of email addresses is blacklisted. So they're trying to reach out to this company and nothing from the @company.com name will even come through to any of their email inboxes. That's how serious these companies are about it. So I like to think about, this is called second order thinking, is the mental model behind this. It's the consequences of the consequences, right? It's the effect of the effect, in other words. So a way that you can think about this is, what will the result be, in the next 1 hour? What will be in the next 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year? Just because something will get you meetings here in the next hour or next day doesn't mean it's good over the long term of what's going to happen over the next year. Yep. So we have to separate decisions versus outcomes. Just because we can get an outcome that we want in the short term doesn't make it a good decision. And vice versa. Just because we don't get a good outcome short term doesn't make it a good decision to get long-term results. So we really have to think about that. So you run the risk of burning out your market. The other thing too that I notice is that the people that respond to very spammy type of emails, they're never really great prospects.
Yep. I was waiting. I knew you were going to say this. This is exactly my experience, and exactly my experience with the students in our training program that come in from just spamming cold calls, spamming cold emails. They're like, why does everyone I speak to hate me? This sucks. I'm just getting rejected. And they come in with this hard, thick, emotional shell, and then they're unable to have empathy for the customers that are in, by happenstance, the right place with the right product at the right time. It makes me laugh so much, the fact that you're almost counterintuitively, by spamming people, you're starting the relationship as the spammy salesperson, and you've got to do so much work then to get just to level grounds with them to be able to have an adult business conversation.
Yeah. Let alone the quality of that prospect. I think about, a lot of my clients are selling into chief executives at Fortune 1000s or, large companies with 5,000 plus employees. And these C-level folks are really smart. You're not going to get any meetings with smart people that know that you're spamming them. They can tell you did zero research. You're just not going to get meetings with those people. You're going to get meetings with all the garbage, in that list. So I would think about that, and we can address the time thing too, because basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're going to do some upfront work and set up a system that we then can maintain over the long run a lot easier. But this has got a lot more work to set up in the short term upfront than for you to just write a couple, really bad email templates and to hit send. Yeah. So it is more work upfront for sure.
But then you might have another analogy for this, but I like to call it like the flywheel effect. And this is a HubSpot terminology. HubSpot talk about this all the time, the main sponsor of this show, that you get that flywheel spinning and you start to build that momentum and you get a few deals from it. And then you're going to get referrals because you've sold appropriately and you've added value. Then you've got insights from your original customers that you can then share via cold outreach. And it's an appropriate message, this industry insight that only you have as a salesperson. You can share that and it goes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you've done so much work 6 months ago that leads that you spoke to that were like, oh, it's not the right time. I'm not going to respond to this. They then have the problem. They have some kind of critical issue within the organization and you're top of mind. You've done all the work. They reach out to you. And this isn't as glamorous and as sexy as the idea of like the Wolf of Wall Street, where you just calling people like that's $2,000, and you're just going through these numbers and crushing it. But I don't know that that's ever been a thing. And it's certainly, I'm 35. I've never seen that in any companies I've ever worked in, that was, that you were capable of doing that. I think that's like a Hollywood stereotype of salespeople as opposed to what's really possible in the modern world.
Yeah.
Let's get into tactics, because that's what we're all here for. We're 15 minutes into the show, and I think we've done a bit of selling now, hopefully to convince people, because I think we're on the same wavelength with a lot of this stuff. How do we go about identifying who are, this is a whole episode in its own right, I appreciate that, but how do we, for the specifics of cold email outreach in 2022, what do we need to know about a customer? What's the 20% of things that we need to know that's going to get us 80% of the results so that we can then send an effective cold email to them?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, and this is, you wanted to know about trends in this episode too. This is the trend that I have seen really in the last couple of years, is a lot of the tools are allowing you to sift through information a lot quicker. So what I want to do, I call this the perfect fit identifier, is with any type of cold outreach, whether that's cold email or I'm running a cadence or sequence or whatever it might be, what I want to think about is how can I have retraced past successes? So where has my company had the most success? And I'm just going to reach out to companies and individuals and follow that same exact pattern, and then I'm going to build upon it. So there's three kind of areas if you were building a Venn diagram that you'd want to look at. There's perfect fit on the account level, on the persona level, and then there's the values level. The values one I'll talk about here in a second. That's the most overlooked part. And it's also a way that you're going to customize the approach. So on the account level, let's say that it's one of two scenarios. People are usually either assigned a bunch of accounts, or it's a bit of a free-for-all at your company. And maybe you have a territory you're working and you can reach out to anyone that you want to. Either way, you're going to have more opportunities than you can reach out to at a time. So on the account level, what I'm looking for is who best represents our case studies, our best success stories. The shortest sales cycles, biggest average deal size. I want to look for the verticals, the industry verticals, and the types of companies that best represent where it's going to be easiest for me to sell to. I have case studies. We have lots of content to show them. I want to be able to reach out into a cold email and say, we've worked with companies exactly like you, and they've dealt with these types of problems, and here's some of the things that they're doing. Can I share a case study with you, or can I share a piece of content with you, whatever it might be? So I want the prospect to feel like, hey, we've worked with tons of people like you before. Well, on the second part of this, on the persona level.
Just before we move on from that, Jason, what does that look like practically? Is that we go through our CRM, find the top 10 biggest deals, and then go to those companies' competitors and say, hey, we've worked with X, we can do the same for Y. Do we look through the top 100 top 100 deals that we've ever done within the organization and go, well, they were this company size in this kind of location, and we spoke to these individuals within the company. What do we need to do very literally to put that into practice?
Yeah, good question. So CRM is a good place to do that. That's where I would start. And if you've closed a decent number of deals, I would just look at the deals that you've closed because those are the best stories that you can tell. But yeah, CRM, your deals that you've closed, your company's closed, whatever it might be. And I'm going to put those companies into a tool like LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And I'm going to look at patterns across some of these companies. So industry, employee count size, department growth, what's in their tech stack, et cetera. And then I'm going to look in my prospect list of 100 accounts, let's say. And I'm going to look and see out of these 100, which 20 or 30 are going to be the best to prioritize first because they best represent what's in our CRM and what we've closed. They best represent the case studies that we have. And again, I'm looking at industry, employee count, and sort of demographic, types of things. The other thing that you could look at too is, some folks sell a solution that where you can go onto someone's website, let's say, and you can see if they need it or not. So let's say you sell something that's a customer support, type of solution or customer experience solution. And maybe part of what you do to make sure an account is a good fit is you go on their website, and if they use a chatbot instead of an actual person, that makes them a good fit. So you're going to look for those, kinds of indicators. So that's on the account level. On the persona level, I really want to, people reverse engineer closed deals, but usually they only reverse engineer from, like what happened in that first call, what happens in the second call, who did we multi-thread into this? They do all of those things, but they don't reverse engineer how the meeting was landed for some reason. I don't know. People just never focus on that. So take those deals that you looked at, those clients that you've personally closed, let's say, and what I want to do is reverse engineer the outbound motion. So literally, who did I decide to reach out to? Who responded first? Who was the first meeting with? So I want to look at like champions, influencers, and then decision makers. And people can be a combination of one or all of those things, depending on the size of companies that you sell to. But I have a company that I work with that sells an automated welding solution. It's hardware as a service and software as a service. So they want to reach out to people in manufacturing and operations. One of their big champions they notice they get the first conversation started with is that these manufacturing companies, it's plant managers. It's people that manage a plant. They're most impacted by the labor shortage around welders, for example. So I think another big mistake people make when they're figuring out who to target is they'd be like, well, I need the chief operating officer to sign off on this, so I'm only going to reach out to those people. They have all the decision-making power. And you're like, you know what? The chief operating officer is not even going to be in the plant where this tool would be installed, and they wouldn't be working with the people running the software either. There's such bigger things that this person would be working on that they're not really going to care about that kind of stuff. So you need to have a mix. Theirs, it's manufacturing and operations. And the VPs in both of those areas are typically the biggest champions and influencers and decision makers in the group. And then we have plant managers and folks like that we would talk to.
That makes sense. I've had a bit of a revelation on this in the past kind of 12 weeks or so, Jason, and this might be useful for you if you're selling to teams as well, sales teams. The person that is signing off on a lot of our Sell Made Simple Academy, the audience know where to find that, our training product, in the corporate environment for more than kind of like 5 to 10 people kind of upwards are HR. I would have never thought to sell into HR. And it's only that people come on as individuals and then they go, well, our company should be using this and I should be getting it for free. I should be spending my own money. So they go and sell it internally on our behalf. We give them a commission for doing so if we get a deal done. And HR are signing off on loads of our deals for onboarding new reps. So they're buying it for their entire teams and then buying extra seats for new people that are coming on board. I've got no data on this, no track record. It's only that I saw it happened twice in November, 2 decent sized deals for us. And then I sent an email to everyone we have a list of people who are in the product and who are trying to upsell it within their own organization. And I said, hey, maybe you should drop this to HR. We did a bunch of deals in January via HR. The CSO or CMO still signed off and had the budget, but it all went via HR. And again, this is a trend that is probably existed for 10 years. I've only just picked up on it. Maybe it's just me being dim and not seeing the trend and not noticing these people in on the meetings on the email threads. But we've done like couple $100,000 in revenue just via noticing that alone. So this is finding out these trends. It can be incredibly powerful. I'm talking from my own perspective here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't noticed that before. You gave me a little hack, actually. I need to start
we
using.
can talk about it off air. But I can explain
Yeah.
the pathway of it. The audience will find that interesting. You might find it interesting. But yeah, HR, it's not their budget, but they're the champions because they seemingly, in these enterprise companies, are organizing a lot of the onboarding for new sales starters rather than you'd think a sales manager would be sat next to them going through all of this. So I made the assumption that we are selling to VPs of sales. In reality, even though VP sales, CMOs, CROs have the end budget, HR is the one going and doing the work on our behalf and grabbing that budget and getting these deals done.
And that's really what you're trying to figure out when you think about the person is I'm trying to find the person that is working in a department that's going to have a lot of energy and passion around making this happen. Like, who cares about this the most? That's what the champion is, For me, it's always been sales managers. These are typically the people I interact with the most throughout the sales cycle, and they're able to do the work for me outside of our sales call time together to organize the troops, get their VP sold, all that kind of stuff. So you bring up a really good point here in that you got to find those people. And with the HR folks, for example, so this is kind of a messaging thing. Actually, well, I don't want to. I should probably finish. There's a third part of this before we get to messaging, but I think the HR one is a really good example that we can use. Mm-hmm. So we have accounts, personas, and then values is the other big one. This is the one where you can reach out to a company that seems like the perfect fit. You're talking to the perfect person, but they just don't really care about your solution. And one of the things that, so I'll give you an example. Customer experience was something that I talked about earlier. If I'm reaching out to a Walmart, let's say, nothing against Walmart, but their value prop is being the lowest cost provider. It's literally on their website. So it's not that they don't care about their customers, it's that to be the lowest cost provider, that doesn't typically mean that you're investing a lot in the customer experience. There are other things that are more important to them to hit that mission, that value of being the lowest cost provider. So that would make Walmart not a great account in most cases if you're selling a solution like that. Mm-hmm. So the values, what I'm going to look at is 3 buckets, and these are the 3 personalization buckets that we would use too. It's education. So what are they educating their customer base about? That's going to be a little bit more applicable if you're selling to companies that are also B2B. I'm going to look at accomplishments. So what does this company brag about? So that might be company awards. It might be workplace awards that they've won. It might be how they're so awesome with certain things. It might be testimonials. It might be case studies. And then the last bucket is investing. So where are they investing their dollars? Are they hiring people right now? Are they acquiring companies? Are they merging with companies? Are there new products coming out, new services, et cetera? And tech stack, is a really big part of that too. So if we were looking at that customer experience solution again, I would be looking for customers or accounts, that have clear signs that they care about customer support and they care about customer experience. So are they really proud about displaying their response times and their 100% guarantee policy, and have they won awards around the level of customer service that they add? Do they have content about the service, et cetera? So I'm looking for those 3 buckets as well, and that's going to drive a lot of the messaging that I'm going to send these folks.
Got it. So the answer to the following few questions from me is sign up to Jason's course training, and this is obviously more in depth there, and he'll hold your hand and help you through it. But let's assume now that we've got what we think. We can use the scientific method to make a hypothesis and test and refine some of this over time, right? But we think via our hypothesis of what our product does, the value, the account, the personas within there, that we've got the right people. We've got a list of 10 accounts. What does the engagement element of this look like now? How can we take what we've learned and turn that into an email? Or we'll stick with email specifically, but an email, or it could be cold outreach in other ways, but we'll stick with email, an email that gets a response, that elicits some kind of reaction in the buyer.
Yeah, so we want to create what's called a messaging matrix. And this messaging matrix is going to give us swipe copy for emails. It's going to tell us what to say in a talk track, etc. So what I want you to imagine is I want you to pick a prospect out, and I want you to imagine that the prospect is on a path. I call this the prospect path. So they have a current state, and in this current state, they have priorities. So there are initiatives this year in 2022, as we're recording this, there are 2 or 3 things that are at the top of their priorities list. And what you're going to find is actually a pattern across all of the people that you reach out to around what they're typically trying to accomplish. And then there's things that they're doing to get that job done right now. So there's solutions that they're using, strategies, tactics, competitors maybe that they're using to help make way in those priorities. And then somewhere along that journey, they run into problems. These are things that get in the way of those priorities. These are things that are impeding their team's progress. And then they have aspirations. So things that they're trying to accomplish 6 to 12 months, down the road. I want to give you an example of what some of this sounds like. And then what we can actually do with that is I'll talk to you about how that translates into an email. So I work with a company that sells into VPs of human resources, and it's not a staffing company necessarily. It's more of a company that has a software solution where people can go in and hire some of these, like factory workers and people working on the floors and that sort of stuff. So with these VPs of HR, what we found out about the prospects is they want to accomplish a couple things. So there are 2 big, kind of categories and priorities of things that they want to accomplish. And I'm looking here at their messaging matrix. So one of those is employee satisfaction and productivity, and the other is HR effectiveness. They got this information because we looked at all the sales calls, all the discovery calls that they do, the demo calls, and we just asked prospects, what are your top 2 or 3 priorities this year? What would make this conversation relevant for you? Et cetera. All you got to do is ask.
I'm interrupting you, Jason, and I'm sorry to keep putting in here, but I think that needs reiterating. How much of a hack is it just to ask your prospects what they want, or previous customers what they wanted and what you delivered on and what got them interested? Salespeople just never do. Companies never do this. But yeah, I know this is how we found out about the HR hack, getting our product into these enterprise organizations. How important is it just to ask your prospects and ask your best customers, what did you want from us? What did we provide? What made you reply to an email?
I mean, it's the oldest advice I could possibly give someone that creates any type of content, right? It's you're 35, I'm about to turn 33. It's the advice we read about 10, 15 years ago, or whenever we got into sales around like the language, right? Just ask your customers. So it's so, and there's a bunch of different things we don't have time to get into with how you can find that information. But the bottom line is I would just ask every sales call moving forward, before you dig into it, hey, just to keep the conversation relevant for you today, what are the top 2 or 3 priorities that are most relevant so I can make this conversation as useful for you as possible today? And people will just share them with you, and you're going to find patterns, and you need to write them down word for word. So I'll go through one of these. So for the VP of Human Resources, it wasn't just employee satisfaction and productivity. It was, how do we take care of existing employees to increase our workplace ranking and retention? So it was very specific around how do we demonstrate that we're a great workplace to work for so that we can win awards and use this as a recruiting tool. How can we retain people so that we have great Glassdoor reviews and we have positive references and things like that? So the current way that they're getting that done, so that's the next part of the messaging matrix. We got priority, how they're getting it done right now. They're relying on in-house employees to get the job done. So they have an in-house team of recruiters that are going out and finding these people. The problem with that is that their current solution leads to a lot of turnover and burnout. Workers don't feel valued, and there's a lot of job abandonment due to poor working conditions, long hours, and shift inflexibility. So this is stuff that's happening on factory floors, like let's say in Amazon, for example. So once I know that's the problem, then I'll look at the aspiration. So what do these people, when they come into sales calls, what do they tell us they're trying to accomplish in 6 to 12 months? They want to be able to focus on culture, diversity, and inclusion, to hire and promote from within and increase employee satisfaction and retention. So that was a lot of information right there. And you might be like, well, how the hell do I turn that into a cold email, dude? That's a lot. So the cold email structure, I'm going to give you an example. I'll read off the email. I'll give you an example of what it sounds like first, and then we can deconstruct it a bit. So here's the email, and it actually follows a very close, kind of template to the messaging matrix. So, hi, Andrew, personalization. Saw that you're offering a $1,000 signing bonus, on-demand pay, and retention bonuses for the positions you're hiring for right now. So you remember the 3 values that we talked about around education, accomplishments, and investments? Well, one of these signs of investment is hiring people. And when you look in those job ads, you can see how they're incentivizing people to work for their company right now. So that was that first line. Saw that you're offering a $1,000 signing bonus, on-demand pay, and retention bonuses for the positions you're hiring right now. This next part is I'm going to speak to the priority of these VPs of HR that I talked to. This got me thinking about how you plan on increasing the speed of hiring and reducing the cost of acquisition, a focus I'm hearing from many VPs of HR in a similar position. So all I did was circle back to the priority, the thing that people are trying to accomplish. And this actually is in alignment with that second priority, the HR effectiveness. How do we improve our hiring practices to increase the speed of hiring and lower the cost of acquisition? This is exactly what they would tell us, word for word. So I'm using their words in the email. And then I'm going to drop a couple of names of companies that we've worked with. Coca-Cola and Good Foods are using our help to avoid running into labor bottlenecks by keeping hiring costs down and hiring timelines short. So that was the big part that they talked about was a problem. And again, this is actually from that second priority, not the one I listed off earlier. They said costs are high, candidate quality is poor, timeline of hire is too long, it's very labor intensive, and candidates are not responding to our job ads. So I addressed that right there. Coca-Cola and Good Foods are using our help to avoid running into labor bottlenecks by keeping hiring costs down and hiring timelines short. Can I get an opportunity to share how this could be helpful for you at ABC Company? Jason. So I've incorporated in that email all of those elements. I've talked to the priority, the thing that they're trying to accomplish, and I'm going to read that second one off right now just so it's less confusing. So the priority, again, was HR effectiveness. How do we improve our hiring practices to increase the speed of hiring and lower the cost of acquisition? What am I doing to accomplish that right now? I'm working with an outside firm, or I'm using an in-house recruiting team. That's a problem because costs are really high when we work with an outside firm. Candidate quality is poor. Timeline to hire is too long. Or an in-house recruiting team, the problem is that it's very labor intensive and candidates are not responding to our job ads. And what do I want? I don't want to improve our hiring process so that we never run into a labor bottleneck ever again. These companies are literally having to put production on hold and turn away orders in business because they can't hire fast enough. Mm-hmm. So my email is just addressing all of those things in that order. And we can go ahead and pause there. I'm sure you have a lot of questions on the email, and we can go in depth and sort of break it down. But an email like this, we get a 5 to 10% plus reply rate. If we send it to the right person, we look for that hiring trigger, and we know that the language is really sharp too because we tested a bunch of iterations of this.
My question, Jason, is when this is done correctly and we've done the work up front and we know what we're talking about and we're making a few assumptions here that the salesperson is somewhat knowledgeable about the industry, their product, the space. Otherwise, it'd be very difficult to come up with these, other than asking. Obviously, any chimp can ask your best customers why they want to work with you and all this kind of stuff and the problems that they've had and trends that they might have in the future. So assuming that it's a relatively educated salesperson, they've been through the process that you've just outlined, and they've put all the steps into place. That was quite a simple, straightforward, logical email. Is that what it should look like? Because if I got an email like that in the circumstance that you just outlined, if I was that potential buyer, I'd go, at the very minimum, I'd go, oh, that sounds interesting. And if I don't respond right now, I'm probably not clicking the spam button. And maybe it might take a few more emails because I'm just busy and you need to catch me at the right moment where I've got my calendar open where I can say, jump on a call. But should the email just be as succinct and as logical and as, that was quite a professionally written email as well. I'm assuming there was no weird GIFs in there and memes and stuff to try and grab attention, right?
No. Yeah, I think that, so you mentioned something really good. People think they have to be really creative. I like what I refer to as a boring approach. You don't want to bore the prospect to death, but I want to be so insanely straightforward and obvious about what this is that the prospect is not having to invest any willpower into figuring out, I don't know what this is. Does this even apply to me? There's there's some stuff going on LinkedIn right now that I think is a little bit concerning, where the content is basically, if you confuse the prospect, they'll respond to you. And I'm like, I don't think so. Well, especially an executive.
You might get a response, right? But the response is what we talked about at the top of the show, of you're now the spammy salesperson who's conned the prospect into getting on a call, and that you're immediately 20 steps behind where you could be if you sent a more appropriate adult conversational email where it's, here's where you are, here's where you want to be, here's what you're blocking your pathway, and perhaps here's how we can get you from one side to the other. Bit social proof in that we've done this for other companies similar to yours, similar size, similar industry, even better if it's a competitor, because hey, you don't want them getting away from where you are. You probably want to work with us as well. Are we overcomplicating all of this, Jason, in the fact that that is just a straightforward professional email that can be templated in the idea of, you might do things differently, but this is how we structure our emails of current state, future state, what's blocking them, how you get them from one side to the other, social proof that they should listen to us. Is that enough to get attention? I'm asking you the same question again because I really want you to double down on it. Is that enough to get attention? Or do we need videos? Do we need to be doing an email, immediately calling, adding them on LinkedIn, and then doing some weird like bullshit on LinkedIn to get their attention as well? Or is just a well-researched, well-written, professional, but still somewhat conversational. We're not being weird. We're not typing a letter here in 1984. But is just a professional, straightforward, conversational, value-adding email like that enough?
I don't know if it's enough all by itself. You know, I think that definitely couple it with the phone call. So the cool thing about this messaging matrix is those two priorities that I mentioned, employee satisfaction and productivity and HR effectiveness, that's the same thing I'd use in my opener for a cold call. Hey, Will, Jason with so-and-so company, you got a minute for me to tell you why I'm calling? You can let me know if you want to keep chatting. Will says yes. Well, hey, I'm talking to a lot of VPs of HR right now, and I'm hearing them prioritize one of two things. I'm really curious what it is for you. One is around employee satisfaction and productivity. So how do we take care of existing employees to increase our workplace retention? Or two, HR effectiveness. How do we improve our hiring practices to increase the speed of hiring and lower the cost of acquisition? I'm really curious which one of those two is a bigger focus for you right now. So I think the messaging repurposed, this is how you can reduce some of the work. So if you repurpose that same message into phone, I could record a video too, Will, with that. I could say, hey, I could share my screen on the video and do something really simple and just narrate the research as I'm doing it. Hey, Will, I was on your website. I saw that you're offering a $1,000 signing bonus, on-demand pay, and retention bonuses for the positions you're hiring for right now. Typically, what I hear from people like you is a focus around one of two things, bam or bam. You're just repurposing the same message across a different medium. So repurposing is the big, it's a huge content marketing hack, as you know, right? You take these episodes and repurpose like a best of, or you take 5 episodes on cold email and you just summarize your best parts of it and you put it into a video on YouTube, right? It's content marketing 101 to repurpose this stuff. Statistically, less than half of people are going to open up the emails that you send. So make sure you're repurposing that content and reusing it. So to answer your question, in email and I don't think you were asking it in this way necessarily. I just want to be clear for everyone listening, watching. Sending one email, no matter how great it is, probably not going to get a response if you only send one email. Like, I need to send multiple emails to this person. I need to call them. I need to reach out to them on LinkedIn, but I don't need to do that in a way that is inauthentic. I can just repurpose the same messaging across those different mediums. One of the things I really like to do is to bump emails and to not do it in a pesky way. So I would bump this email if they didn't get a response. And in 2 days, I wouldn't say, hey, did you get my email? I noticed you opened up my email but didn't get a response. Or, hey, I noticed I haven't gotten a response from you. Just a simple, any thoughts? Any thoughts, question mark, Jason. That gets a pretty high reply rate. So a really simple bump email can work really well. There's another type of bump email that works pretty good too. So we did talk about GIFs. The best GIFs are the ones that you make. So if you can make a short video or GIF of you holding a piece of paper that says any thoughts on it and you're pointing up at the email, BombBomb is a video platform. They kind of popularized that approach to give them credit. I've seen that work pretty well too, but I wouldn't send that to a VP of
No.
operations.
I,
You know
I
what I
was
mean?
I was letting you
I might
finish
send
there,
it to
Jason. I was
someone
like,
like in
maybe
tech.
maybe don't send
You
that
know?
to the CEO. Maybe you not send that to Balmer over at Microsoft or someone. But I think
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you're saying there. In that, and I think we've not got time. We'll have you back on in the not too distant future to dive into this deeper, because I think you might be into some of the psychology of this as well and understanding it. But when you share a similar effective message over and over, you add a layer of congruence to what you're sharing with the prospect. And if you truly have and it might be one, two, three, and there might be layers, and they might be layers of the same problem onion, so to speak, for the prospect. But when you're sharing one, two, maybe three different problems and how you can solve them for the prospect over the course of a week, a month, 6 months, whatever it is, depending on the size of the deal, what it's worth and appropriate doing, you're congruent, and that shows the prospect that you're adamant in what you're doing. What a hack does is go, well, we can do this, but we've got a discount on next month, and then this week we've just added this feature which might not be relevant but might be relevant. Hey, can you get back to me on this and this? And you go all over the place, and you have commission breath, and it sounds desperate. You're just trying anything to hook them, to claw them in. Well, if you've got a great product that solved this problem for people similar to your prospect, it's almost coming from all this from a standpoint of, hey, it's almost inevitable that you're going to work with us. I'm going to keep following up because I'm a professional, and eventually we're going to get a time booked in the diary. And whether that includes a GIF or not is obviously going to depend on the person. You can send me a GIF all day. I love GIFs. But you then send in a congruent message with regularity. I don't know if is a real word. I've just made it up. Over the long term, it shows that you're a professional salesperson as opposed to someone who's just going to do, as you alluded to before, with these weird stuff that's going on LinkedIn to trick people into getting on calls and follow up on emails. You're not having to go back to the stone age of selling, which is manipulation, weird 5-word hacks to get into someone's subconscious and drive up their levels of emotion and all this weird stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, you don't really got to do a lot of that at all. It's I think of this, your sequence is like a personalized ad campaign.
Yep.
The average person needs to see an ad like 6 to 8 plus times in order to even click on it, and that's from something that they might like. Actually, that might be a retargeting ad that they are seeing from Amazon or Nike. So my advice is always, don't go into this situation where you're prospecting to someone and you expect to have better brand awareness than like Nike or Google, because they have to put multiple impressions in front of people to get them to click on stuff too. So you're no different. You're probably not working at a company that has that level of brand recognition. Most of us aren't. And if you are, that's awesome, but most of us aren't. So treat it like a personalized ad impression where you're putting a custom message or ad in front of someone. They're not going to always click or respond on everything that you say, but that doesn't mean that first email they didn't respond to wasn't a big reason why they responded to the third or fourth email, or why they decided to pick up your call.
Yep. It's almost like we're telling a story, right? It's progressing. There's going to be peaks. There's going to be troughs. We're going to try and raise emotion. We're going to try and add logic to it. We're going to make things simple. Maybe there's an element of making things more complex, and then you go back and forth, and it's going to be an experiment. And we'll wrap up with this of, we're using the scientific method, right? We're making these hypotheses, we're testing them. And what I find is that when salespeople get that message, they just can dominate a marketplace. Maybe it lasts 6 months, maybe it lasts 18 months, depending on what's going on in the market, your competitors and what your customers are doing as well. But that's when salespeople hit target, do pretty well, make some money, and then just make stupid money for 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
And when sales becomes an incredibly lucrative and fun place to be. So with that, Jason, tell us more about Blissful Prospecting. Tell us more about the work that you're doing over there and how we can get in touch and follow you, mate.
Yeah, I mean, this is super fun. This is what I eat, live, breathe. I prospect every week. Outbound is my thing. So there's a couple of ways that you can get more of what we talked about today. So blissfulprospecting.com, tons of free content on there. So we got a podcast. There's guides, webinars, all kinds of stuff that we're doing there on outbound. And then, if you're a rep, we have a program called Outbound Squad. That's pretty cool. So you get coaching from me. You get a community that you get to interact with, and just all of my best course content that companies like Zoom and Medallia and some of my other clients use. Same exact content there. And then I also work with sales teams too. So if you're wanting to implement something like this, we have an accelerator program where we kind of take you through this. You get to work one-on-one with me over 6 weeks, and that's a lot of fun, and we deliver some good results there too. So blissfulprospecting.com is the best place to check out everything.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to blissfulprospecting.com, your podcast, everything else that we talked about, and I'll probably link some blog posts of the specific things that you've mentioned in this episode as well, where appropriate, in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Jason, I appreciate you, mate, for your time, your energy, your insights on this. The fact that I think you're a man after my own heart of putting this into frameworks and systematizing a lot of it, as opposed to just dumping it out there and hoping people can follow along. So that's I appreciate that from you and your work, mate. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.